Okay, so for week 1 lectures, this assignment is going to be the same no matter which coding class you're taking from me in this particular semester. So I'm starting this off because if you see a different class listed in step 2, that means you're in possibly my 94, which is Node.js, or my 84, which is React, or some other class for that semester. So, but this content and this process that you're going to walk through is going to be the same for no matter what class you're in, because this process is an important one, and really one that hopefully if you've taken other classes like my CIT82 or Todd McLeod's 85, you've gotten some exposure to Git. Now, if you don't, just FYI, so Git is software that allows you to track your changes of code, and it allows you to do it on your local system, and then GitHub allows you to publish those changes out to the internet in a hub, and they call it the hub. It's really just a site that allows you to do that. So, and this class is a really important part of our work, and so we start with the very first thing we do in the class. So the first thing you're going to need to do is actually acquire your GitHub account by going to the site and logging in or creating your account. Now, if you already have a GitHub account, it's fine, use that. If you don't set one up, you will create what's called a username, and the username is what you send me so that I can add you into what GitHub offers, which is a GitHub organization, which is basically just a way for us to have our code for just our class for both what we call public and private purposes. So we're going to get into that in the next step. But step 1 is you've got to set up that GitHub account, or tell me what it is. And then once you have that, again, do only create free accounts here. There is an option to do a paid account, but you don't need to do that because it is completely free. This is a service owned by Microsoft, and it's a really helpful one. And if you're going to be around coding at all, which I hope you are by taking classes like this, then you're going to need to know Git and use GitHub, or maybe some other hosting service, but knowing Git is important. All right, so once you have that, just use the inbox feature here to email me, and then I will set you up in the GitHub organization for your particular course. Now, I'm actually going to show you what this looks like. I use my main desktop for about a year now. I use Pixelbook using Chrome OS, so I use Debian Linux, but it doesn't really matter what you're using for your OS on your own computer, because Git can be installed in any of those versions, okay? But the reason I tell you that is that in this particular case, I have a incognito tab set up, and I have logged in my student account. And so what I'm going to do is use this account to demonstrate to you what it's going to look like. Okay, and I'll walk you through this from your perspective in a minute, but I'm actually going to show you what I do. So in our GitHub organization, once you email me your username, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to invite you. Okay, I'm going to invite you as a member. Now, again, I already have here's the account I'm using for demonstration. I'm going to invite that username. Now, this is just because I've used it before. I'm going to start fresh. I'm going to make you a member, and then I'm going to send the invitation. So as soon as the invitation is sent off, I'm going to move back over to my incognito, and you should get in your inbox for whatever the email you use for the account, and an email indicating that you have been invited. Okay, and you can click here to join. Totally fine. But there has been an occasion, and I think it's worth noting, and this is part of why in my instruction, I actually give you a link to the organization. But basically, and I'll just show you this, when you're logged into GitHub, when you're logged into your account, this is your dashboard. So if you just do CIT90, whatever, 93, 94, 84, whatever, then if you go to that organization, you will see that you were invited. Okay. So again, it doesn't matter which way you do it. You just have to view the invite and then join it either here or in the wherever. I'm assuming Gmail, because most students have Gmail accounts, but again, you could be using some other account. Your campus email, I believe, would have been fine. The important thing is the username that you set up. Okay, so I'm actually going to join from here. I'll just join. And again, I'm doing this from your perspective. So now that you're in here, right, now you have done this part and you've joined the organization. So now we're ready to do step 2. So I'm going to have you create 2 repos. And repos are just like a directory in a sense on GitHub that we will, in the next step, clone locally. So we're only going to be working in this step out on the web, but in the next step, we'll move to working locally. And then I'll just walk you through the process. So I give you the standard for what I want these usernames, these repos to be set up as far as the way you name them. So your first name, why do I have 2 pluses there? And then the first letter of your last name, underscore, and I say private, and this is an or, a public, and actually because you're setting up 2, I just show you this to give you kind of, you'll first do one that's private, and then you'll do one that's public. It doesn't matter which way you do it. And then along the way, you're also going to, as you set it up, you're going to be asked for something called the git ignore. And I'm going to want you to set this up. So I'm going to go ahead and click here just to grab this. Okay. So this is a good example of what's called a file that is a git ignore. It is a part of your setup that once you clone locally will be helpful to you to ignore some of your editor. Now, in this case, I'm assuming VS Code is your editor. So if your code editor is something else, you'll just need to go find what your git ignore setup needs to be. Okay. All right. So now that we have the basics, what we want to do is actually start this setup, right? So I'll walk you through it. And again, the instruction is there to help you. So now that you're in the organization, right, you'll click new here. And again, we're going to do both a public and a private. So in this case, Rio FCC student, I'm going to assume that's the name, right? And actually, I think I'll just do it this way since it's a little funky. I'm just going to assume, S is the name. But like if I was doing my own, Waller underscore, and so this case, let's do the public one first. Okay. Now, I like you to give it a little description. Rio's public repo, something like that. And because we're doing the public one, we'll just go ahead and click on the public. Now we're going to do the private one in a minute, right? So I was just showing you this, but I think I'm going to go back here now that I've done this, Rio FCCS, and not do it all lowercase. Okay. And then Rio's student account, public repo. This is where you set up this git ignore. Now you can manually create it. I do like you to set up a README. You don't have to do a license. That's if you were actually doing development that required, based on the way you were going to have people acquire the software. And there's many different options here, but for our purposes, you can ignore it. But I'm going to do this. So this is just going to set up the account, and there's really not one for VS Code, and so just choose the first one. It doesn't matter. It's really just setting up the file that will change in a moment. All right. So this is your first repo, your name, your last name, underscore. Again, you can do public or private. Probably following along with mine would be good. Make this one public, match the name here, set up a README, and add a git ignore. Again, I've just set this action script, not used much anymore, but it just sets up the file for me. So now I'm going to create that. Okay. And now that's created. And actually, so this is now my repo out on GitHub that I have for my public, and you can see my git ignore, and I'm actually going to modify this right now by coming into here. Now you could do this after we clone them, and we'll clone them in the next video. But for this, right, I'm just gonna, because now that I'm looking at this git ignore, and this is where I'd taken the default of action script. Now I don't know if you saw me do this before, so let me just retell you this. I clicked on this link. I got this set up right here. I copied that. And then I'm going to move over to here, and I'm just going to paste that. Okay. All right. So what you can do here, this is kind of nice. And this is really, if Git is new to you, we're on GitHub, but this is actually the process of using Git. We're going to commit our changes. So changing your code, tracking your changes to your code is a very important part of coding, first of all, this industry, and for this class, because one of the things you get graded on is actually doing your commits correctly. But in this case, I'm just going to let the defaults roll. I'll talk more about commit messages later. This is just telling me where it's going to publish directly to what's called the master branch, and I'm just going to go ahead and commit that. All right, so I've made a change. Now what I'm doing here is I'm working out on what's called the web interface. I hope you can get through all the way through this assignment and get working locally. And I actually will show you this in the next videos. But when you hear me talk about working at the web interface, that's what I'm talking about. Okay, so let's actually go ahead now and do the second one. So now we're going to do the private one. Okay, so I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to go back by clicking in the organization. I'm going to create another one. Oh, by the way, it's really important to understand conceptually when you're working inside of your private repo, that's between you and I. But when you're working inside your public one, that'll be between you and everybody else in the class. And so there'll be times when we all share code together, and there'll be times when you share code with me just privately. Okay, so I'm going to now do the private one. Okay, is that right? Is that right? I don't know why for a minute that didn't make sense, but there we go. So this is Rio's student account, and this is private repo. Okay, so now this defaults to private. So when you do the public one, you have to change it, but in this case it's defaulted here. We do the same thing where we set up a README. I'm going to do the same thing again where I set up just the git ignore file so I can modify it, and then I go ahead and create this. Okay, I'm going to do the same process again where I go into the git ignore. I hit the pen to modify it. I come down in here, I select all that's in here, and I paste because I still have it in there. So now one other thing I want you to add here, and you can do it to the other file as good practice before we clone if you want, but you do need to include node modules as not as it being ignored. And this is the proper way you do that. Now, all my classes this semester and most likely in the future will be using Node in some way. Node is the server side of JavaScript. So you want to also include this in addition to the VS Code stuff, include then also to ignore, because anything in this file is not going to be tracked. And you'll see why in future and very soon if you're taking Node, and a little while later if you're taking JavaScript on the client side, why this is helpful. All right, so I'm going to again let this roll as default, and there we go. All right, so believe it or not, as a matter of fact, let's just show you here. So what happens here is once you set these up, right, you can actually tell by looking at this that one of them is private and one of them is public. And if we were looking at this as a fellow student, one of your fellow students, they would see your public one, but they would not see your private one. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is this is it for this video. And now what we'll do is actually walk you through the process of how to install Git. It's a pretty simple process. And now clone, which basically means in a sense copy, but it actually does more than copy, these repos that you've made onto your local system. Okay, good job getting through the first step. Keep going.